Hello, my name's Paul Silberstein. I'm a neurologist with an interest in Parkinson's disease and deep brain stimulation. I work in Sydney, Australia, and I'm very grateful to the organisers of Insight 2020 for the opportunity to be a speaker at this fantastic seminar. So, my brief is to talk to you about what's new in DBS for Parkinson's disease. And I guess what's important for us to kick off with is just a brief review of what deep brain stimulation is all about. Although I do know that many of you in the audience will be familiar with this treatment. So DBS, or deep brain stimulation, is a procedure where wires are implanted in specific deep brain targets and then connected under the skin to a pacemaker device, which is usually implanted in the chest wall. This stimulated device delivers a continuous electrical impulse to the brain, therefore providing a continuous therapy to people with Parkinson's disease. So when we're talking about what's new for Parkinson's disease, an important concept to start with is the fact that DBS itself is actually not new. DBS was actually first utilised in the treatment of Parkinson's disease in 1994 and has been now the subject of thousands of peer-reviewed publications in the medical literature. Most importantly, from a research point of view, there have been 5 international double-blind randomised controlled clinical trials examining the efficacy of Parkinson's disease, and this clinical trial type is really the gold standard for comparing one therapy with another. These studies in patients with intermediate and advanced Parkinson's disease, and we'll talk about what that means, all showed that surgery had superior efficacy over medical therapy in terms of achieving treatment benefit and quality of life. There are now 3 device companies that produce DBS systems internationally. And in fact, over 150,000 DBS cases have now been performed worldwide. In addition to this tremendous worldwide experience, there is deep, extensive experience in many treatment groups around the world. Our team has actually performed over 500 DBS procedures for Parkinson's disease, which means that we've implanted over 1,000 electrodes for patients with Parkinson's disease. This kind of deep and extensive experience is seen in many places around the world because the therapy has been around for a long time, and there are many clinicians like myself and my surgical colleague Dr. Raymond Cook who've been involved in the therapy now for more than 20 years. So what are we going to talk about today? I thought it's important that I try and clarify what the role of DBS is in the treatment of Parkinson's disease, and also discuss when is the optimal timing for its use. We're going to talk a bit about the benefits and the risks of DBS for PD, and most importantly, because I guess that's the topic of today, is for me to talk to you about what's new in DBS for PD, and there's been some exciting developments in this regard. When talking about DBS, it's important to put it in the context of the Parkinson's disease journey. And we know that this is something that's been very well studied for many years. There are a number of large studies which have followed patient groups for 25 years and even more. And this has given us a really good understanding about what happens in Parkinson's disease, when the problems arise and what those problems are. And this very much guides both our medical and non-medical therapy, but also our surgical therapy. What we do know about people living with Parkinson's disease is that the rate of progression between individuals can be quite variable, but the milestones or the difficulties that people living with PD experience as time go on tend to be fairly similar. We also know as clinicians that a patient's symptom profile can to some degree be predicted by disease duration, and this is something that we often use to tailor our therapies. Okay, so I thought it would be helpful to drill down a little bit more about the natural history of Parkinson's disease, and here I'm going to be talking specifically about the physical symptoms, not wishing to ignore the importance of non-motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease. But if we talk about physical symptoms, most patients will present with what we consider to be an asymmetric neurologic presentation. That means that one side of the body tends to be involved more than the other. Patients might present with a tremor in one hand, or they might present with stiffness and slowness or walking difficulty. Once the diagnosis of Parkinson's is made, the general idea now is that we should start treatment, and we should start treatment with medical therapies that improve control of symptoms. In this regard, we use two main lines of therapy, either levodopa or dopamine agonists. And we find that most patients within 3 to 6 months of starting their treatment will achieve a consistent, substantial, usually 60 to 80% improvement in their physical symptoms, and they'll find that that control is consistent and reliable through the day. And usually this occurs on anything between a once a day and a 4 times a day medication dosing regime. This stable, consistent phase of Parkinson's control for most patients lasts years. Over time, however, if we follow patients long enough, all will develop what we term motor fluctuations. And that refers to this idea that towards the end of the dose, patients find that the benefit of the medication is wearing off a little bit, only to be replaced by the next dose, and so on. When motor fluctuations develop, that's when we bring on an additional line of medical treatment, or where we start to layer other therapies for Parkinson's disease, other tablet therapies. And these might include a dopamine agonist in patients started on levodopa, or it might include other drugs like entacapone or the monoamine oxidase B inhibitors, rasagiline and safinamide. And usually with these therapies, we're able to re-achieve fairly consistent control through the day. Inevitably over time, all patients, however, will ultimately begin to develop motor fluctuations again. And some patients will also develop these excessive and involuntary movements called dyskinesia. Dyskinesia most typically occurs as a peak dose phenomenon, and patients can therefore get into a situation where they spend some of the day where they're stiff and slow with tremor, and other parts of the day where they have excessive and involuntary movement. Here again, though, we do have medical options. We can fractionate medication dosing, and we can introduce other drugs like amantadine, and often even after 2 or 3 cycles of recurrence of motor fluctuations, we can re-achieve consistent and stable control through the day. The difficulty that can arise, though, as time goes on, is that these motor fluctuations can become uncoupled from the medication cycle. Motor fluctuations and dyskinesias can become more inconsistent and more unpredictable. And when patients are at this stage, it's very difficult with changes in tablet therapy or patch therapy to re-achieve this consistent control that we saw earlier in the disease. Fortunately, now we have 3 additional therapies, or a second tier of therapy, that can be very helpful in re-achieving consistent control in this situation. And these 3 therapies include, of course, deep brain stimulation, but also some infusional therapies. Apomorphine, which has been around for many years, an injectable therapy that's usually delivered via a pump, via a subcutaneous infusion. The newest therapy in this class is duodopa. This is where levodopa in gel formulation is infused by a pump directly into the intestine. All 3 of these therapies have been shown to reduce off time, to reduce dyskinesia, and to improve quality of life. So let's talk a bit more about DBS, which is really the main topic of today. So when we talk about the benefits of DBS, really again the key issue is the re-achievement of consistent control when that's no longer achievable with tablet therapy. So when we look at the finer detail of it, one thing that we understand about DBS is that after the surgery, even at patients' best, they're not better than they were at their best before the surgery. So stimulation in some ways mimics the medication response. The major benefit of stimulation over medication in this patient group is the improvement in the off-medication state, the reduction in the severity of off-medication states, which means that patients then are able to achieve this much more consistent control through the day, much like they had many years earlier with their tablet therapy. So what's the magnitude of benefit of DBS? Generally what the studies show and what our experience shows is that DBS improves patient symptoms to about 75% of their best on medication response most of the time. We know that because DBS is associated with a significant reduction in medications, that this is also associated with a significant reduction in dyskinesia. And most patients who've had DBS reduce their dyskinesia by more than 75%. Medication reduction can be very important in some patients where medication side effects have become an important part of their symptom complex. And accordingly, this is really the third major benefit of DBS. Most importantly, though, DBS in clinical studies has been shown not just to improve physical symptoms, but also to improve quality of life. And this is always the highest benchmark of the beneficial effects of a therapy. We've discovered some more things about the effects of DBS over the years. We know that some patients prior to their surgery experience significant psychic fluctuations in addition to their motor fluctuation. So what we mean by that is some patients, when the medication dose is low, they feel anxious, irritable, flat, blue, lethargic, and when the medication effect is at its best, they might even feel a little bit elevated or a little bit manic. And one thing that we've understood is that these dose-related psychic fluctuations respond much like the motor fluctuations and tend to even out significantly after surgery. We also know that DBS has a significant benefit on sleep. And in fact, this is often one of the first things our patients tell us after the surgery is, "Oh, that was a great night's sleep. I haven't had that in as long as I can remember." Finally, on the non-motor front, we know that DBS improves bladder irritability. So the benefits of surgery are individual, but can be predicted to a large degree by patients' medication response. And fleshing this out is something that's a very important part of the workup for surgery. This is a video showing a patient who's had surgery at our institution. And in fact, this video was just completed after we performed the 500th DBS surgery at our hospital.
It's very difficult. What you do during the day is centred around how bad the Parkinson's is at any time during the day, how bad the tremor is. And originally it was just the way I walked was strange. I didn't swing my arms. I get anxiety as well, but it exacerbates the tremor. The tremor has become so intrusive in my life. I found out that this operation was available and that's had great success.
Today we've completed the 500th Deep Brain Stimulation case at North Shore Private Hospital. I think this is a pretty remarkable milestone in terms of a team that's been working together for a long time.
This is something that you basically live and die by your results. You can't hide anywhere doing this sort of work because patients' expectations are that they're going to get better as a result of surgery, and you have to achieve that.
It seems like a miracle. The main change is the lack of tremor and the lack of anxiety. I used to suffer badly from anxiety and I don't suffer from that at all anymore.
He's saying, let's go out, which is something which never happened before. I'd go out and he'd just stay at home. The thought of travelling anywhere was just so daunting, but now we're talking about having a trip not overseas, just having a trip somewhere in Australia, which we just couldn't do. So many changes.
So this is a wonderful benefit for this patient, and I guess it's very important to point out that results do vary between individuals, but can largely be predicted by the medication response, and that's an important part of our surgical workup, to be able to give patients a very clear idea of what they might achieve out of the surgery and also what they may not achieve. One of the commonest things that people ask me about is when's the right time? When's the right time to be thinking about surgery? And DBS guidelines have been published in many countries around the world. We published in 2013, and more recently other Australian colleagues have published in 2017. And very much the international consensus now is that the time to think about DBS is when initial therapies are no longer providing satisfactory control of symptoms. So what that means is that for patients in whom medical therapy is not providing consistent control, it's definitely a consideration to be looking at surgery or any of the other advanced therapies, because we know that this second tier of therapies, the advanced therapies, can re-achieve that consistent control that we did find with medical therapy in the earlier years. The other reason there's been this move towards earlier surgery is because we understand that significant physical disability can be associated with other knock-on effects in terms of patients' personal relationships, their ability to work, and their quality of life. And with clear evidence now of quality of life benefit, the general view is that an earlier time for surgery might delay or in fact not allow to occur these more significant social and quality of life consequences of Parkinson's disease. Okay, so now on to the main subject of today's talk, which is to talk about what's new in Parkinson's disease. And in this regard, I'm going to talk to you about two main areas: advances in the operation or the operation technique itself, and I'm also going to talk to you about changes in DBS devices. And this latter topic, the DBS devices, really the most exciting, because what we're seeing now is an improvement in the way in which we can deliver stimulation with consequent benefits in terms of improving an already excellent therapy. Okay, so let's talk about the operation. So I want to let you know that we haven't abandoned the old things that work, because surgery's been around for a long time. This is our whiteboard from the operating theatre, where we note down our target coordinates for the operation, and these old-fashioned elements of our surgery are still important. We also still use x-rays, and x-rays is a very important way of ensuring that electrodes are placed where we expect them, where we expect them to be. In the last few years, though, there's been some significant advances in the software that we're able to use to do our deep brain stimulation planning and targeting. And you can see this is a picture from our regular workstation, which shows you that we can slice up the brain images in lots of different ways, and we can look at the brain in lots of different ways. So we're able to look at the problem of planning a good, safe trajectory through the brain in multiple different modalities. And these are static pictures, but very importantly, this software now gives us some more dynamic images, which really help in terms of planning our trajectory and our targeting. And these things are super important because they improve the accuracy of the work that we're able to do, and they also improve the safety. And so I'm going to show you a video now of how this dynamic aspect of the software works, how it allows us to really track the trajectory of the electrode through the brain. And if you look down in this screen here, as I move this line up, you'll see in this section here exactly where we are all the way along the way, as if you're looking down the probe of the electrode, and you can see how you'd be tracking through the brain. And this technique really allows us to miss critical structures like blood vessels. It allows us to plan the way down through the brain through the safest areas, avoiding areas that we shouldn't be in. And these techniques have really refined the accuracy, the efficacy, and the safety of surgery in recent years. So another big part of the surgical technique is really the working together of the team. And you can see this is my colleague Dr. Cook, and here we are working together at the workstation. And we actually plan the surgery in a variety of different ways using this workstation, but using other modalities also. And we cross-reference those modalities against each other, and we cross-check against each other. So it's a bit like having a pilot and a co-pilot, cross-checking each other, improving the safety and the efficacy of the procedure. Okay, so let's talk about now changes in device delivery and, well, not device delivery, but in stimulation delivery. And this is really provided by the devices that we use. So I'll talk to you a little bit first about traditional stimulation delivery, because this is really what all of our data is based on, or all of the studies are based on, and traditional stimulation has provided a very robust therapy in itself. So traditional DBS electrodes have 4 contacts, and we can use one or a combination of those contacts when we're delivering stimulation into the brain. We know that as we gradually turn up stimulation, that stimulation tends to spread in a relatively spherical fashion away from the electrode. So as we turn up the stimulation, we're spreading current further and further away in like a soccer ball shape into the brain. And you can see that the problem that can arise here is that as we turn the stimulation up gradually, if I go back one step, so with the stimulation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to spread stimulation within specific target structures and not to spread stimulation outside of that, where it might involve other structures that give us unwanted side effects. And you can see that the problem arises as we gradually turn up stimulation, that stimulation spreads into the structure that we want it to spread into, but can also spread out into surrounding structures. So because of this problem, there's been a lot of interest in this idea of whether we could develop stimulation wires that might allow us to guide or shape or steer stimulation. And in fact, this is a cartoon of a current steering electrode which was used in some clinical studies that I'm going to tell you about shortly. And you can see that this electrode, rather than providing just a spherical soccer ball shape, actually allows spread of stimulation into specific quadrants. And you can see what the potential advantage of that is here, where if we're wanting to spread stimulation only within this target structure delineated by the blue line and not outside of it, directing the stimulation might allow us to apply therapy where we want it and not to apply therapy where we don't want it. So this model of current steering has actually now been assessed in 2 intraoperative studies, one by an Italian group and one by a German group. They each used different electrodes, but both electrodes had the potential to steer or shape the direction of the current. And in fact, what they did in these clinical studies, there were brave patients who agreed to be part of this, is that during the operation, the patients had this wire or this wire implanted, had some test stimulation using that wire, and then this wire was removed and the definitive electrode was placed down in the same location. And this gave us a way to test the clinical effects of stimulation during the operation, and to test not only the benefits but also the side effects, and try and get an idea of what the threshold to benefits was and what the threshold to side effects was. And both studies effectively showed the same thing. So if we look at the traditional stimulation electrode, if we look at both therapies were able to achieve a benefit at low stimulation current, and that benefit gradually increased as the current went up. Now, the real difference between the traditional stimulation model and the current steering model was what happened in respect of side effects. And here, with the traditional stimulation, in fact, if I go back one step, I guess when you think about therapies, it's useful to think about stimulation like medication. So what we know with medications is usually when we start at low dose, we can gradually build up that dose, and we build up with progressive benefit. And then eventually, as the dose builds up, we tend to cause side effects, and the relative benefit tends to wear down. And so stimulation is the same. So with the traditional stimulation model, we gradually increase stimulation, and then eventually we get spread of stimulation to surrounding structures, and the relative benefit of stimulation starts to go down. So this was the critical issue with these studies, is that what they found is that the level at which side effects occurred with the current steering electrodes was much higher than the level at which it occurred with the traditional electrodes. So in a way, what the current electrodes did, if we take the medication analogy a little bit further, is they allowed us to use higher dose and achieve greater efficacy with less side effects. And so this is a big move forward in stimulation, because it basically increases our therapeutic window. It allows us to deliver more efficacy with less potential side effects. And what I'm really pleased to tell you is that this current steering model of delivering stimulation is now in active commercial use, and we are using this in our patients. And you can see here, this is the platform that we use, where you can see that the stimulation is actually being spread in specific quadrants, in specific directions. It's being shaped or steered to allow us to achieve that maximum benefit and to minimize on side effects. Okay, so that's where we are now. Where are we going with DBS? The big move forward in DBS is to try and move towards what's called closed loop systems. And so what that means is systems where the stimulation measures activity in the brain and then modulates its output in relation to that brain activity. So you could think about it like an air conditioner. The air conditioning comes on, it cools the temperature down to a certain level. Once it reaches that level, the air conditioner turns off, only to restart again when the temperature goes above the threshold level. And so these systems might allow us to further refine the way we're delivering stimulation to the brain, and again maximize on efficacy and reduce side effects. So that's science fiction for now, but these things are actively being worked on by commercial device companies. Okay, so it really leaves me now just to acknowledge the people that I work with. This is our surgical team. This is Raymond Cook, the neurosurgeon, Dr. George Fracchia, who's the surgical assistant, who's been working with Dr. Cook now for more than 30 years. This is Dr. Donnelly, one of a duo of anaesthetists that we work with, and the anaesthetists are extremely experienced in making this surgery as comfortable as possible for our patients, and they certainly make a big difference. This is Nathan Anderson, who's a radiographer, and in fact there are 3 radiographers that we work with, and he's a very important part of the team in terms of doing our intraoperative x-raying and assisting with the planning scanning that takes place prior to the surgery. This is the practice that I work with, integrated neurology, and these are my colleagues, Dr. Liang, Dr. Gu and Dr. Lebomsky, all neurologists who are DBS programmers, and also Dr. Hannah Shin, another important member of our team, a rehab physician who adds a whole new dimension to the treatment of our patients. These are our administrative staff who are really, I guess in many ways, the face of our practice, and our patients know them well. In addition to our local DBS programmers, we're very fortunate to have an extensive group of neurologists and Parkinson's disease specialist nurses who assist in our programming. And you know, for those of you who don't live in Australia, it's a very big place. New South Wales, my state, has an area of 810,000 square kilometres, and my city, Sydney, which is 60 kilometres across or 12,000 square kilometres in size, has a population of around 6 million. So we have other programmers working in Sydney who assist with the long-term management of patients treated with surgery in our unit, and up and down the coastal seaboard we have other colleagues really along the length of New South Wales who are important satellite centres in terms of looking after our patients. And similarly, we have a similar arrangement inland with Dr. Lebomsky, who also works in Sydney. In addition to our local Australian colleagues, we've been working for many years with the New Caledonian neurologists, and we share in the care of their patients who come to Australia for surgery. So I guess finally, just some information about us and some information resources, both blogs and websites that we produce not only on deep brain stimulation but also on Parkinson's disease. So finally, just a big thank you again to the organisers. I think this is a fantastic forum for sharing information, and I wish you all the best at Insight 2020. Thank you.